Good evening, everyone. Uh, Welcome to the session on Mission Energy Access for a Just and Sustainable Future for All. We have a very esteemed and distinguished panel here, and we'll also have others joining in as we go along. Uh, just as a short remark to build the background for this event, alongside the globally rising temperatures, there's been a continued increase in the demand for energy as countries continue to develop, especially in line with the overarching goal of decoupling emissions from GDP growth. And the key factor enabling this transition is the energy sector. Most importantly, the priorities for countries lie in balancing and addressing national development priorities such as fostering sustainable economic growth, eradicating poverty, providing energy security, and securing the basic social needs. So several economies from the global south, including the LDCs, SIDS, and the emerging economies, are faced with this compounding challenge and the balance of the developmental needs. So, we decided to frame this based on the paper which has been co-authored by most of the panelists, to use a developmental lens to look at clean energy transitions as the key to most adequately capturing the discourse, of especially the global south. This session engages with a distinguished panel on a mission mode approach that was recently highlighted in the paper that was co-authored at Nature, and will also entail the launch of ISA's report on unleashing renewables in advancing an economic, social, and environmental equity. We thank the panelists and look forward to an inciting session. Let me invite Dr. Mathur, DG ISA, to deliver his opening remarks, please.
Thanks, Karan. A very wonderful evening to all of you. I'm glad that you are all here at this time. One of the key things that we noticed was that there were very, very different actions that occurred in different classes of countries. So what was happening in the developed world was very different from what was happening in the emerging countries, was very different from what was happening in the least developed countries, and so on. And one of these issues was access to energy, particularly for those who don't have it. This led us to examine the whole thesis of rural electrification. Generally speaking, if you remember, rural electrification is about providing electricity to all by extending the grid. We are now at a time when the costs, and this is a report which you will find on our website, we did it as part of the G20 work, that the costs of solar plus batteries, solar mini grids, the cost of electricity from them is less than the cost of grid extension for most of the people who are yet unserved, and certainly those who are more than 10 kilometers away from the grid as it exists now. This led us to examine why are we not focusing on solar mini grids as a goal, which is why we are putting together this panel discussion today. And I am really glad that we have Professor Ambuj Sagar and Professor Jakub Museveni here, who are focusing on this key issue and were co-authors in the paper that we wrote on in Nature Energy. I'm also delighted that Ms. Gauri Singh, the Deputy Director General of IRENA, is here as a moderator to focus on how do we enhance action on enabling the rural energy access, or what we are calling mission energy access for all through the renewable sources, particularly solar. I'm also delighted that during the course of the evening, we would release the work that we did looking at how you look at different income groups of countries and the kinds of challenges that they face. I'm delighted that the Boston Consulting Group worked on this almost at the last minute and have brought together a report which is in the current avatar largely infographic. It presents the kind of information that we want to. Next year onwards, you will start seeing a more detailed report which will be made at the time of COP. Again, let me welcome you all here. I want to thank all of you for being here, and you particularly for joining us in enabling us in both this discussion and the release of the report. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, sir. We were hoping that the president of the ISA and the Minister of Power and New and Renewable Energy Government of India would have joined us for the keynote address, but unfortunately he was unable to travel. So, as Dr. Mathur had mentioned, we did a quick fire report just titled The Unleashing Renewables in Advancing Economic, Social, Environmental Equity. The report offers an archetype-driven approach towards assessing different needs of transition, challenges in the key levers that can help increase socio-economic and environmental benefits for the global South. Let me invite Anirban, who's the managing director and partner at BCG, and who led this report to make a short presentation of sorts on the report. Anirban, over to you.
Thanks, Karan. And thank you, ISA, for giving us the opportunity, Dr. Mathur, Karan, for this association with ISA on a topic or a theme which is as close to our heart as well, which is about bringing a more people-centric and equitable development around the world on the back of low-carbon technologies. And this is a topic which we have been working with various organizations across the world. So while it was a reasonably short time, an intensive effort, but we hope to have brought together the collective thought across ISA and BCG into it. And like Dr. Mathur said, what we have tried to see is that there is a clear need for energy transition and moving into renewables. And within renewable, again, we have looked at the merits that solar brings with itself. It is the lowest emission technology. It is now the lowest cost per kilowatt hour that it brings. It has also achieved the highest growth across all different types of technologies that are being perpetrated, so that there is a clear rationale for greater penetration of solar across different countries and regions. In spite of that, what we observed was that there is a clustering effect, that there is still regions of the world where solar has penetrated to very high degrees, and there are regions in which it hasn't. So to be able to articulate the need of what is needed going forward, we have tried to bring a more of a segmental approach. We looked at the high-income countries, which don't have an accessibility issue, but there is a transition issue. That close to 57% of their assets now required to be transitioned into renewable. That provides a different kind of a challenge. Then we looked at the emerging economies, which are going to be the highest contributor to emissions going forward, and therefore there is a need to de-link growth because energy consumption will keep increasing. So how do you de-link the growth from emissions? And that is, again, where technology solutions come in, but there is challenges around high cost of capital that needs to be addressed. Then we looked at low-income countries, and there the challenges are extremely different. And I think the panel will also speak about the need for a lot of decentralized solutions. How do you increase accessibility? But there's also elements around collection, around just sheer on-ground governance that needs to get taken care of before there is a wider pull for such capacity building that has to happen, both in terms of the supply chain as well as the consumption. And then the fourth type we saw was on the island nations, where very different structures. There is a lot of import dependency. There is a need for technological solutions, very bespoke to those regions. So what we have tried to do is lay out why what is now needed, that we have come here, we have come so far, and solar indeed is one of the leading technologies. But to now go the next mile, we require a very decentralized, bespoke approach, and that is what we have tried to bring into the paper. So we hope that this starts the conversation, and we take the discussion forward from here. And once again, thank you, ISA, for giving us the opportunity to be part of this journey. Thank you so much.
Anirban, thank you very much. And I hope this lays out a process of doing this annually and in a more detailed fashion from here on. Let me pause here and maybe request the panel to release the report. So maybe hold it up and officially release it so we can also put it out then online. Oh, yeah. I think moving on, we now head into the panel discussion, and Madam Gauri Singh, the Deputy Director General of IRENA, has kindly agreed to moderate this panel. So, Madam, I'll hand it over to you to take us forward from here. Thank you.
So thank you, Karan, and thank you, Dr. Mathur, for inviting me to be a moderator to this panel. And it's really, I mean, the way I am looking at it, that we have an audience that, of course, understands the various nuances of energy access. So I don't think there will be a need to explain why it's important, but maybe, because it's a COP, 28 is all about action. And it's, you see it all across in the taglines. The first day we saw with the loss and damages getting through and commitments getting made, it gave you the momentum that this COP is going to be different and it's going to be about action. So I do think that maybe, that's the kind of tone and tenor I would like to give to the conversation that we're having, and keep it at a very conversational and a discussion level rather than a very formal kind of a thing. So I do think that energy access has its seasons. There are seasons when energy access is the flavor of the day and everyone is talking about energy access. And then there are times when suddenly it's the big utility scale that gets dominates the conversation. But at the end of it, we still are sitting in a world where there are nearly 700 million people without energy access. And I think, we might have made some progress, but clearly it's not enough. And if yesterday was a momentous day where we saw nearly, I think it was 118 countries signing up to tripling of renewables and doubling of energy efficiency pledge. Now, if that's anything to go by, clearly there's a momentum. There's a political momentum. The governments that are thinking that this is the time to really put in all efforts into energy transition. But why are things not moving on the energy access agenda? I do want to turn to Yaqub first. And Yaqub, in Africa, the way we see the way the habitation is spread, in many of the countries, what I've seen is that you have about 4 or 5 cities that are almost like magnets and attracting the populations, and you have these urban and peri-urban areas. And then you have about maybe 20% in the rural areas, and mostly women who get left behind because it's the men who have come to the cities in search of work. Now, when you're looking at a process like this, and this will only become stronger because we're seeing this urban migration, how do you think the energy access as a challenge can can move forward? I mean, are you looking at maybe megawatt scale of solar mini grids to power these city magnets and productive use spread in the rest of the country? Or you're looking at maybe other formats. What are the governments really thinking in terms of strategy in Africa?
Yeah, thank you, Gauri. Good to see you as well. It's been a few years. I mean, I think it's a very good question. But before I kick it off, I just wanted to sort of speak, why I even entered into the energy discussion. And it was purely an energy access issue. So, I mean, in the late 80s, I was doing a master's and eventually enrolled in a master's program called Energy Technology for Developing Countries. And the thing that attracted me about it was that the energy access question was the centerpiece of this program. And of course, when you look at technology at the time, we were really dealing with renewables and to some extent a little bit of biomass in that program. And so in a sense, I've been doing, or at least associated with renewable energy for quite some time, before the climate discussion. So it predates that. And there were a number of things that attracted me about it. One is precisely this reality that you have communities in Africa. I originate from Ethiopia and have majority of my family still live in darkness, particularly in rural areas. And these are rural areas which are very much, disconnected from the cities. It's only, the last 15 years or so, the road system was able to make them some connections, and then, you're beginning to see electricity also spreading in a, relatively smaller scale. So I think there is that element that you have dispersed communities in Africa that consume a little bit, not a huge amount, just, for lighting purposes, maybe for radio, TV, and so forth. I'm not saying that eventually things will not change, but that's the level of consumption we're talking about in some of the most remote rural areas. So in many ways, at the policy level, there is a certain level of disconnect. They recognize at policy level that the rural electricity problem is a real challenge, so we need to do something about it. And renewables can play a small role because of their modularity and so forth. But a large part of the policy attention is not on these. It is a very urban-driven type of energy policy, which does tend to overlook communities that are the majority, not only that, but also the main, the backbone of the economy. So I think, what we have is a schizophrenic type of a policy situation in Africa. There is some lip service about, rural energy in a modular sense, but the real attention is elsewhere, in my view, whether it's renewable or fossil fuel.
I mean, I think you've raised a very important point about this kind of a policy gap that exists. And Dr. Mathur, I want to turn to you because you have many of the ISA countries are countries in Africa. And we all know that without the right policy, and, I mean, I'm now really hate the word enabling policy framework because I don't know what it really means. But still, without a policy framework that's supportive of a strategy that's at least 5 years, 10 years, has a vision of at least that much, you can't be doing these piecemeal. And what I want to really ask you is, are we barking up the wrong tree? So should we, as people who are interested in energy access moving forward, should we be actually speaking to ministries of agriculture? Should we be speaking to ministries of rural development, women development? and just forget about ministries of energy who are more concerned about getting the megawatts in and don't really understand the kilowatts anymore?
You are partially right. Partially. We can't forget the ministries of energy because, especially as far as provision of the electricity, at least for lighting or for running small industries concerned, the Ministry of Energies will continue to be there. Now, let me say that one of the big changes that has occurred in the past couple of years is that solar energy with batteries is now the cheapest option, even as compared to grid extension, even as compared to diesel generation. This has completely changed the picture. The problem lies that the amount of investment that you have to do in solar plus batteries is more than you have to do in diesel. Or even in the first instance of grid extension. It is the cost of delivering energy at low volumes which actually leads to higher costs. This means that governments will actually slow down the process. So we are saying by 2030, the goal of universal energy access cannot be reached. It will be even more difficult if you have to focus only on government funds, which means we have to get private sector funds. If we have to get private sector funds, this means that business models are important. And if you ask me, that is the single reason why this has not taken off. We need business models. I don't care if the business model says that the government will do this, or government will subsidize it, or government will provide viability gap funding for it. But at the heart of it, we need to try out, some Chairman Mao, I think, said, let 1,000 flowers bloom. We need to try out different kinds of business models in different parts of the world. Your organization, mine, ARKHIM, UNDP, Damilola Sustainable Energy for All. Let us try different models. I would like us to meet again next year and see what models work under what conditions. This would mean regulatory, it would mean political alignment, it would mean learning from data, so research, all of this. Because in a sense, the technology is there, but now we need to figure out what is it that what needs to happen in order for the volumes to be built up, as you said. So long answer to your short question.
No, I completely agree. I think you're absolutely right about business models, and I don't think we can envision being able to reach what the SDG 7 has put before us as a goal if we don't bring the private sector in. And private sector, of course, will be looking at a business model that makes sense. And there's not enough grants to go by. So, that's the reality. Ambuj, you've spent a lot of time working on energy access technologies, including clean cooking. And what's your sense in terms of the the availability of different technologies and only the need to customize them as per the local conditions? Or is it that we are still searching for, the right techno-economic mix still? What's the sense you have?
So Gauri, I think, let me answer your question by stepping back a little bit, right? I mean, most of my work, as you know, is on technology. And I think the key to, and really thinking about how can you use technology to address big societal challenges, right? That requires diffusing technology at scale, right? And actually, fundamentally, the ingredients of that are fairly straightforward. The technology has to provide a service that's useful to the users. It has to be at a cost that's low, and at least low enough for it to diffuse. And thirdly, generally, it's some kind of a standardized model, right? Now, standardization can come in the form of technology, but standardization can also come in the form of what Ajay was talking about, maybe business models. So I think what we really need here is some much more, let me say, not some, but much more systematic thinking about how do we learn from the world of technology and technology diffusion and are able to draw upon that. I'll give you an example. If you think about Tesla, right, that really came out of nowhere and has kind of really taken over the EV space in many ways in the US. They really drove down the technologies by creating these gigafactories, right? It's one of those comes from the world of technology where you say, if you have some sense of how the cost will go down, you actually do large scale procurement and drive down the cost, and therefore you just drive down the learning curves, right? That's the kind of thinking we also have to do here, right? So it's not just about business models for deployment, but also business models that actually help drive down the prices, right? By doing large scale procurement, we've been very good at actually many of our experiments in India, actually the work Ajay did with LEDs, which aggregating the demand. But then you do have to have business models that are actually reasonably standardizable, right? And you need to put all of this together. And I want to just highlight, I don't want to say that this is going to be simple. It's obviously not going to be easy, partly because, as you said, energy access is one of the things, it's a flavor of the day. Sometimes it's in flavor, sometimes it disappears. I think it's really important to make sure that energy access stays part of the conversations at the COP. Why are we talking about this in the COP? Because as we think about really a climate-friendly future, we need to make sure that the development agenda stays at the heart of this. And so even as we're thinking about tripling renewable energy, we need to make sure that in that tripling, just a rush to meet the targets does not actually leave aside this kind of an agenda. I think this agenda is can be very much part of the tripling renewable agenda in a way that also then makes sure that the questions of justice and equity stay at the heart of the agenda. And I think that to me is the right way to move forward. We're moving forward to address the climate goals. We know that if we actually use renewable energy to address energy access, we actually reduce emissions. We lead to all kinds of development benefits, and making sure that climate and development are intertwined. I think it's the right thing to talk about at a time like this, at a COP, but in a way that I think to draw on our understandings from the world of technology and really use that understanding to be able to drive forward the agenda in a much more robust fashion. Sorry, very long answer to your question.
No, I think, yesterday I was listening to President Ruto, and he, as a lot of you might know, is a very, very sharp thinker and doesn't really mince his words, and is very, very clear on what Africa needs. So one of the things which is coming through very clearly from the narrative that's coming through from African countries is, don't talk to us about climate change unless you make development, as you said, at the heart of it. Because that's the only way that we are willing to listen to any kind of narrative building which you might want to do about climate change. And I think this is probably something that I could turn to you about, because one of the other very important issues, and I'm going to actually make it much more finance oriented in this round, is mobilizing finance. And the quantum of finance that has gone into renewable energies in Africa, we'd estimated is about 2% in the last 2 decades. So absolutely negligible. And if within that, if you dig a little deeper, the grant portion was even smaller. So, and it's all good to talk about blended finance. It's all good to talk about these things. But do you really see that coming? Do you see there's some momentum around the mobilization of finance for energy access?
I mean, I think, as you said, Gauri, that there is a lot of hot air around this issue, and it's not something. Yeah. So there is quite a lot of discussion, and it's been up there on the agenda for quite some time now, and we're still scratching the surface. It feels like. But I think something else also may need to happen, and this is that the way in which the finance discussion is narrated, but also the way in which it is discussed, even in the context of energy access, is through a kind of financialization lens, where the argument there is, well, you have to really fit yourself in a way that the private sector or the investor is satisfied. And I think that's part of the challenge. Of course, that is part of the equation. But what does that mean? What that means then is that the state or the country has to jump through quite a difficult set of hoops to be able to meet that challenge. So I think it's within that sort of context that we keep conducting this conversation. What I would like to see is perhaps a slightly changed type of discussion around how do you mobilize, how do you create the policies first and foremost to be able to attract your own domestic investor, because I think waiting for this international money is we've been waiting for that for quite some time. And of course, if you look at the other side, meaning that in Europe and North America, a lot of the investment is coming through their mature domestic markets, whereas the Africans have to depend on volatile and often cautious international markets. So I think the conversation, I'm not saying that should be abandoned, but certainly there needs to be an additional conversation around how do you create conditions where investors and entrepreneurs, instead of keeping their money into other areas, or perhaps low-risk areas, quick returns, how do you energize them to be able to invest internally? Because I think if you look at Korea, China, so many examples out there, without mobilizing domestic finance, I don't think you're going to get very far, in my view.
Absolutely. And I do want to bring in Fatih into this conversation, because Fatih, we hear you talk extremely passionately about energy access and about, and I know that IEA is now going to be putting a large amount of money into understanding the issues in Africa and bringing them and highlighting them. So I think I could turn to you to speak to us about the kind of work that you're doing with, because we already know that you have this great passion about energy access.
Thank you very much. So just to correct something, large amount of money, no. Large amount of passion, work, sweat, but we already have a very small amount of money ourselves. So this is but we have big hearts. But first of all, thank you very much here, Ajay, for inviting me. And thank you very much, Mrs. Singh and the colleagues. Thank you very much for being with us today. Now, my passion, IES passion and access is almost 3 decades. Certain things are improving, and I am very happy to see that. Some 20 or 25 years ago, I remember when we make the first World Energy Outlook, we look at how many people have no access to electricity. It was about 2 billion. I remember the number in my mind, because I thought if you want to solve a problem, first you have to measure it. So we tried to measure 2 billion people. And then what happened is, first China addressed its electricity access problem, and China went frontal and make a major push, government policy, and solve the problem. Then after China, and it is one of the most impressive things in my view in the history of energy, India made a big success story. bringing electricity to every single village that we know. So it's a huge, 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 in my view, success story. And in my view, if you ask me, as somebody who follows India since a long time, Ajay, you know, if one of the 5 big success stories of India energy policy in the last years, I think this is the one of them, together with the energy efficiency, street lighting, this is or many others. So this is India, and now it is mainly the access to electricity is an Africa problem. Okay. Now, I was telling the colleagues one very really disturbing fact as a human being, forget energy, environment, climate, IEA, etc. So in Africa, a couple of data points. In Africa, 1 out of 2 persons have no access to electricity. Second, Africa has the 40% of the solar radiation of the world alone, and the good quality of radiation. Third, the amount of electricity generated in Africa from solar is half of the electricity generated from solar in Netherlands. So think of the map of the world. How big is the sub-Saharan Africa and the size of Netherlands, and how sunny is Africa and how sunny is Netherlands. It is, in my view, it is one of the biggest injustices we have. And as a result of that, we are seeing Africa is not able to develop in many areas, lack of access of electricity. But now we have started a new thing, as Mrs. Singh rightly mentioned. It is the clean cooking. Now, dear colleagues, I live in Paris because my job is there, and in Europe and in North America, many places here, of course, in Middle East and everywhere, the gender equality is a major issue. And also in India, many places. And when you talk about gender equality, it is more people look at, for example, in the job place, how many percent women, how many percent men, and we, at the IEA too, we are trying to make it equal, which is a major, very important issue. But for me, if you ask me, what is the most important gender equality issue today, it is the following. In Africa, 80% of the people use primitive cook stoves for preparing a meal by using wood, agricultural waste, animal waste. And it is almost exclusively the woman who is cooking it. And this creates a major respiratory disease. And it is one of the 2 reasons for premature death for women in Africa. It's unbelievable. And we have calculated that to solve this problem requires only $4 billion. $4 billion is a very small money, to be honest, when you look at the order of magnitude of the problem. And in fact, we look at the, if you, in Africa, if you want to solve both the access to electricity problem, plus the problem of clean cooking, you need $25 billion, which is, to put in a context, in Europe, to build a 1 LNG terminal. 1 LNG terminal, you need about $25 billion. And in Africa, you can fix all the energy access problem. But for clean cooking, I am extremely passionate about this because I find it a major humanitarian issue. Forget the energy, climate. It's a gender issue. And not only for women premature death, but especially for the small children. And we are organizing a major international conference this next spring with lots of heads of states and the philanthropists, companies, investors, to get this $4 billion. And I very much hope that Ajay, you, ISA, and Irena will be a part of this force, as well as the colleagues here. And it is a job beyond energy for me. It's a job beyond climate change or beyond this. And I think we need to fix it in 21st century. Hundreds of women die because of the respiratory disease, because of the cook stoves. This is not acceptable. And IEA will take care of that. So I just want to tell you that.
Fatih, because we have you here, and I do need to ask you another question.
Of course.
But before that, you know, we often have these discussions. Many of my women colleagues, that had it been an issue that was impacting the men, we would have probably solved it years back. But you know, it hasn't
If
been.
you ask me this question, my answer is you're completely right.
No, there's
If
not
it
another
was men, it would have been fixed. So this is the reason it makes me very furious that it is a solvable problem. You don't need a technology or like hydrogen, or it is just for God's sake, LPG. And India, I forgot, India with the Ujjwala program fixed this issue. And I am thankful to Prime Minister Modi, the previous Minister Pradhan, Minister Puri. So I am thankful to them. They fixed this issue in a big time by giving the LPG canisters to the women. And I think Prime Minister Modi gained the hearts of many women as a result of this. So I completely agree. If it was men, we would have solved this problem.
But my question to you was that, you know, this is a COP which is all about action. And you are one of the thought leaders who's helping shape the narrative. What we are really hearing a lot is that there's a move for many large donor countries to shift their focus from mitigation, which, you know, they've started thinking that this has become fairly commercial and it can go much more into the private sector, to adaptation. And adaptation finance is going to be the big stay. So, you know, I mean, a problem like this has to be defined within the scope of adaptation to catch the attention and the finance. So this is really about narrative shaping, which I think you're very good at.
I completely agree with you. Now, in fact, the problem is, you say the money going to adaptation instead of the mitigation. You are right, but in fact, I am afraid not enough money going to adaptation as well. This is another story altogether. But if we want to package this issue, maybe to get more attraction from the donor countries, we may get more attraction to put it in the context of adaptation. But to be very fair, Ajay, when I raised this idea with a few government leaders, such as the Prime Minister of Norway, the President of European Union, Ursula von der Leyen, they are all said, we are there. We are coming and we want to fix the problem. Many philanthropists, they said we are going to be there to fix the problem. I believe we will fix the problem because it is 4 billion. I mean, for us, of course, it's a big thing. I'm just coming from a meeting. I am late with Bill Gates. He has a lot of money, of course. For Bill Gates, 4 billion is different than what it means for us. But when you look at the energy expenditures around the world, 4 billion is peanuts. As I told you, you built you fixed this problem 6 times instead of building one LNG terminal. When LNG terminal is 25 billion. And we built mushrooms LNG terminals in Europe after the Russia-Ukraine crisis. So we have to change it. We have to change the narrative, and it is the reason, to be very frank with you, I bring it around also gender issue, because gender gets more attention for some reasons than the energy. I have no problem as long as we get the money. So I want to get the money as a gender. But I think there will be a turning point 2024 on this clean cooking. And we need to bring the hands together, because I cannot think of the more important issue than that. It is really, it changed the life of the people. As you saw in India, I mean, this Ujjwala program.
Actually, I wanted to just kind of pick up on your point, Gauri, about adaptation, because I think it's an interesting one. Because you're right that is where the focus is going to be, and rightly so. But I think the important, maybe at least for me, the important thing to realize is if we do it right, energy access can also become the basis for local economic development, because electricity actually is an energy source that enables all kinds of other services that can generate livelihoods and all of that. And that itself actually helps with adaptation. So in other words, I don't think we should be decoupling these things. We should really be understanding that all of these issues link to each other, and enhancing energy access in many ways will also, in a sense, build resilience locally and therefore help with the adaptation agenda. So it's not an either or, that it's not a tension, that you have to have obviously finance for adaptation programs, but this itself could be seen as partly also an adaptation program in a manner of speaking.
With co-benefits of mitigation.
With co-benefits of
Yes, yes.
So, may I suggest that the challenges across different countries are different? We have addressed, for example, the developed countries. We have addressed the emerging economies. We've also looked at the developing countries. What we have not looked at are the small island developing states. If you look in this report, you will notice that the small island developing states have a peculiar problem. They, in terms of emissions per gigawatt, it was amazingly high, and we wondered why. And it turned out that the additionality over the emerging economies was largely because of the diesel that is spent in boats, in maritime. Because, the small island developing states are large island countries, large ocean countries. Boats are essential. Therefore, would looking at solar boats be an answer? I ask you this. As the Solar Alliance, we will work towards creating solar boats, particularly for the Pacific and the Caribbean countries. But what we need is you would need facilities where they can be charged. So you would need to build solar facilities at the terminals. We will work with the countries to see how we can do this. It's still an unresolved problem.
I think, Dr. Ajay Mathur, you've really brought us to a very important point, and which is what the publication also brings out, that even though we talk about energy access as if it's one thing, but there are nuances that need to be looked at, and you have to really look at, which particular subset of either the activity or the country, profile that you're dealing with. But what's also very clear is that the technologies are there. It's not as if we have to really, wait for something to come. There are also entrepreneurs who are willing to take that extra mile and go the extra step to be able to do the outreach. There are also good examples of business cases that exist. I think what's probably needed, and is probably what Fatih was saying, is to really raise this agenda to get the leaders to focus. And, many times, the biggest distance that one needs to travel is between the two ears. So I think it's to get the mindset right and to get it the attention that it deserves, because it's imminently solvable, and it's there are enough agencies and enough people who will come on and get this going. So I just want to thank all the panelists, and thank you, Fatih, for... Yes, please.
So because I didn't see Ajay this long time. We see each other all the time. And because Ajay, may I thank you very much and congratulate you what you have done with the ISA. It is shining, thanks to your really great engagement. We are very happy to see it is happening. And you came at a time when the solar is around the world, dominating the game. This year, dear colleagues, in the entire world, of all the power plants built, 60% is solar only. Solar, I'm not saying renewable, solar only. Then you have the wind and everything. And the people were saying in the past, you and me know, the old guys in the energy business, the king coal. This was a big coal. I said the king coal is dead. Long live the queen solar. Solar is the new queen. I finish it here. Thank you very much.
Very much. Very quickly. You have to do this.